Hello, my name is Cameron Bracey, and I am a senior elementary education major at the University of Mississippi. This summer, I am hosting monthly School of Education Instagram takeovers that address special topics and issues in the field of education. The July takeover will focus on teacher recruitment and retention. To help us describe the realities of teacher recruitment and retention, we have enlisted a panel of educators working on these efforts throughout Mississippi. Thanks for everyone for agreeing to participate. I'll now introduce the panelists and our event organizers. Dr. Felton Cortez Moss is the founder and owner of All Means All Consulting. Dr. Moss has served as a classroom teacher and school administrator, as well as a bureau director for the Mississippi Department of Education. Catherine Melkai serves as the Human Resources Director for the Ocean Springs School District. Before her time in this role, Melkai was a classroom teacher in the same district. Crystal Cormack is the Bureau Director of the Mississippi Department of Education's Division of Educator Talent Acquisition. Dr. Erica Avan is a National Board Certified Teacher who currently serves as the Assistant Federal Program Director and Curriculum Coordinator for Holly Springs School District. Prior to taking this position, Dr. Avan served as an Intervention Coordinator and teacher for the Oxford School District. Jacob Ferguson, who helped organize this panel and will be working to feature this conversation on social media, is the admissions counselor for the University of Mississippi's School of Education. He helps to recruit for the university's undergraduate and graduate education programs.
Thank you all for coming out to this panel. I know that you're taking a lot of time out of your schedule to be here with us today, panelists. So I want to thank you again for agreeing to be here and agreeing to be a part of a conversation that I think is going to change the way that we think of teacher recruitment and retention. I think a lot of times when we talk about teacher recruitment and retention, we think, oh, that's the principal's job, right? Or that's the superintendent's job, right? But we all have some sort of role in making sure that teachers come into the profession and that they stay here. So thank you all for coming out today. So my first question, to just get right on into it, is why do teachers or educators choose the profession? So I guess even think about your time as an educator. What made you want to be an educator? And we'll start with Crystal Cormack.
Hey, thank you. And I'm really grateful that you selected me to be a part of this conversation. I entered education about 15 years ago. I came to teaching through an alternate route program called Teach for America. Teach for America doesn't, it's not located in all places, but they place teachers in a variety of districts and states and cities across the country, and now has begun to even place teachers internationally in a variety of countries across the world, focused on the same mission of ending educational inequity for children of color and low-income children. And so I was specifically drawn into this organization and into the profession because of the mission. I had grown up in Chicago and had a very segregated elementary education experience myself. I thought that it was definitely something that I could do to help kind of give back to communities like mine by entering teaching. And I thought, I'll stay in the profession for 2 years, which is the TFA commitment. And 15 years later, I'm still doing this work because once it gets in you, it's in you. And so, and I have been just privileged to be a voice for my students at the variety of tables that I've had the opportunity to sit at, and to advocate for progressive education reform policies in a variety of arenas that help end the disparate educational opportunities that children of color and children in low-income communities don't get. So that's what drew me into the profession, and it's still what keeps me in the profession, even in times like now where it's very, very challenging.
Okay, thank you for that reflection. Dr. Avant, what are your reflections on that question? Why do people choose to go into teaching?
I truly feel that teaching is a hard decision. And I say that because I started in this profession 16 years ago. And prior to that, I was a biology major. I ran from this calling. This was not something I ran to, I ran away from. And being that I was a child of poverty, coming out of Forest, Mississippi, I'm seeing my parents work in factories my entire life, seeing the teachers that I grew up with who were very influential to me work 2 and 3 jobs after teaching. And I knew I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be a part of that life. So I wanted to be a doctor. And so I was a biology major. And it's interesting because even though I was a biology major, I worked with Boys and Girls Club. I worked with Leapfrog. I was a elementary tutor. I worked with the America Reads program. And I was constantly surrounding myself in schools with students, with teachers. And I remember that I was a junior, my junior year, and I was miserable. I was running from a calling and was miserable in it. And I remember my mom telling me, she said, I wish you would stop running from this calling and just become a teacher. She was like, because you're the same kid that used to teach all the other kids in the community during the summer. And so that's why I say, we're not going into this for the money. We know that has been established in this career, but we go into it because it is a hard decision. We're going into it for the kids. We're going into it because of the relationships that we have with teachers that impacted us. And so I think that is why people run to education. I think that's also the reason why sometimes some of the students that we really need to run to education, especially African-American males, don't run to it because they don't have those connections to teachers, those relationships that make others run to it.
I like that. We're actually going to get onto the topic of diversity and equity in recruitment. So thank you, Dr. Yvette, for that. Let's now go to Ms. Melkai. Ms. Melkai, why do teachers or educators choose the profession? And you can reflect, like I said, on your time in education and making that decision.
Well, previous teaching, I also did alternate route. Previous teaching, I was in the corporate world. And looking at the instability of it, the teaching profession is very, very stable. And that's honestly one of the biggest reasons I went into it, and wanting to be part of my community and be part of that with my family and have my, being close with my children. Once I got into it, I had no idea the love and that would develop. And really watching the students grow and develop and becoming members of the community and having an impact on that was, it was really beautiful for me, and I really enjoyed that. And like I said, I had no intentions of that. That wasn't really why I went into it. I went into it because I wanted to be with my children and have a similar schedule with them and have that rock stability. So I know that's sort of not really like a correct answer per se, but it is definitely the honest one. But like I said, I just being with the children, and I think, as far as, others going into the profession, highlighting how rewarding it is to have that impact with your community. I think that's definitely a highlight.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Thank you for that. And remember, every answer is the correct answer. Okay. To teaching, we're glad that you're here with us in the profession. So, Mr. Moss, or Dr. Moss?
Yeah.
Congratulations. I want to throw that out there. Dr. Moss just received the confirmation on his doctorate, so we are excited about that. So Dr. Moss, what are your reflections on the reason why people go into the profession?
First of all, thank you for having me here. KP, it's always good to be part of conversations about teacher supply and demand. Today is interesting for me in that this morning Facebook reminded me that 8 years ago today, Teach for America sent me off to be a classroom teacher in Greenwood. And so I was reminded of a picture of that. And I think about what ultimately got me to that place, which many folks don't often see this as a pathway to advancing education policy. But I got into teaching because of an interest in policy. I had an interesting experience doing advocacy work at our legislature that ultimately landed me in this space that if I truly wanted to be able to impact our education system, I needed to do the tough work of being in a classroom. I did not assume I would become a school leader and end up working at the DOE. My plan was to leave Teach for America. Ms. Cormack spoke a little bit about wanting to potentially do your 2 years and then leaving. And then some years later, I'm still doing this work in education. So I think for me, what led me to this place was an opportunity to make a difference in a larger system from a policy perspective. I think as we look to more, to find out more about why folks are going into teaching, you'll find folks who are going in for this exact reason. I want to go in and disrupt or dismantle systems that have not worked for every child in this country. And, you know, even when I think about that, much like Erica just spoke a few minutes ago, I used to have class on my grandmother's porch. If it wasn't church, it was class that I was having on the doorstep. And so there's always been something inside of me that has held this regard for teaching, having watched my grandmother teach for 47 years. And so I really entered this work through policy and wanting to make change in a larger system through advocacy and policy.
My next question is going to be more related to, you know, the processes of becoming a teacher and what that looks like. So what barriers do prospective educators face as they move through the teacher pipeline? And for those who don't have like a solid definition for what the teacher pipeline is, I have a little definition here. So the teacher pipeline is described as the collection of stages involved in becoming a licensed teacher or educator. So at the very beginning, getting a high school diploma, to the very end, applying for your license. So any step in that process would be included in the teacher pipeline. So what barriers do prospective educators face as they move through the teacher pipeline? We'll start here with Crystal Cormack.
Thank you. There are myriad barriers to entry for prospective educators, not only in our state, but across the country. And I think that if we are truly going to be solutions oriented about increasing the number of teachers in our field, increasing the diversity of teachers in our field, and specifically addressing the lack of certified and experienced educators in low income and high minority school districts, we really have to address those barriers head on. I think having served as the state director of educator licensure for a period of time, I can personally attest to how complicated and convoluted licensure is. It's complex. It's incredibly complex. I can't tell you the number of times that I have cried with people who feel like they are jumping through hoops and not attaining the goal that they've set out to attain, either because they have taken the wrong test, or they can't pass the teaching test, or they enrolled and completed a program, but it didn't lead to licensure. So the barriers are incredible. And I think that specifically the one that I feel most passionate about relates to social capital and individuals who look like our kids and who come from the same communities that our kids come from, who don't have access to social capital, who don't know that they can call their legislator to help navigate processes on their behalf, who don't feel empowered to call the State Department of Education and make an appointment for someone to explain some of these things to them and help them navigate this. So I think that in some ways, if we don't begin to address the barriers that exist in getting teachers to and through certification, we inadvertently perpetuate those barriers and make it more difficult to diversify our teacher pipeline and keep great potential educators out of the system.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have any reflections on that? Anything they want to add to the conversation of what barriers do prospective educators face as they move through the teacher pipeline? And if you guys want to speak from personal experience, I think that makes this conversation much more inspiring when people listen to it.
I think one of my key reflections is, and I'm so glad that we brought up this conversation and we started with barriers, and I want to be like Crystal and be solutions oriented. I think we have to dismantle the entire system of certification and rethink it. I think what we found amid COVID-19 is that there is an opportunity to adjust policy. And so for far too often, we were told that there were things that stood in the way of us being able to adjust policy to have an educator workforce that reflects the communities in which we serve. And now we know that's not true. Amid COVID-19, our Department of Education and other departments of education across the country drastically rethought processes. When Praxis could no longer administer a test, we said, oh, it's not necessary. We so easily gave up on something that we have seen to be foundational for years. It's no secret, the research is clear that these assessments are full of bias and that candidates of color disproportionately perform at a lower level on these assessments, not because they don't have the skill or the will, but because these tests are generally biased. And so I think if we're going to talk about barriers, we have two places to start. One, we have to look at assessments, and if it's the measure, there's no study in this country that points to the factor that can correlate student achievement to performance on a Praxis exam. And if we can't find any correlation there, I don't believe it needs to be the gold standard for admitting folks into teacher education and determining if one should enter the classroom. I think we do need accountability. We need some way to measure or assess one's readiness for getting in the classroom, but we don't need to hang on our hat on something that's not statistically significant, if you will. I think even beyond that, we have a barrier before assessment. Right now, our educators don't speak well of our profession. And that is an outgrowth of what has happened in this country with regard to how we've treated teachers and how we've advanced policy in this country and how we've advanced federal legislation from ESEA to NCLB to ESSA. Teachers have struggled with these shifts, and often teachers have not been at the epicenter of these conversations. So I think if we're going to address barriers, we need to start early on and think about the way in which we treat teachers, which results in the way that they communicate about being a teacher. And then secondly, we need to dismantle this system of assessment that we've made the gold standard for how one should be able to get into a classroom.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Moss.
I love this question. Actually, this is what my dissertation was on, the barriers, addressing diversifying the teacher pipeline, and agreeing with both things that Ms. Cormack and Dr. Moss has said about this. I think that we can even go a step further when we look at those barriers. Agree, the legislature, ridiculous. Agree, certification, antiquated. Like Dr. Moss says, if we can turn the world on its side and get rid of certification requirements that we have held on to for so long, and so many candidates and teachers who have lost out on being in the classroom because of this antiquated system, this could have been done. Not only did we grant, with COVID-19, we didn't grant people certification for 1 year. They have a 5-year certification. Something like this could have been done beforehand. You take one test and you're certified for K through 6, K through 4, 4 through 6. One test can't tell you that. So this system was too antiquated. And so I'm thankful for COVID-19 for that. Also, as you said, the public perception about education, teachers' perceptions about educators. If nothing else has come out with COVID-19, they are in love with teachers right now. We gave parents back their children, and now they want to give them back to us because they appreciate teachers. There should not be a teacher that does not have a supply list fulfilled or a parent-teacher conference blank spot on a list this upcoming school year. So, but teachers' perception of ourselves, teachers have not been allowed to have a seat at the table. And we see this right now. We're going back to school. Everybody's worried about students. We're reopening schools, and no one has talked to teachers. The concern is not on teachers, it's of the students. And the students don't function if the teachers don't feel empowered. And that goes back to why we're not diversifying. We have to go back to teacher education programs. We got to go back to preparation programs. There are barriers within that. financial obligations. We're giving these students debt on top of debt, and putting them into a field that they're going to be indebted to pay back for years. And let's just be honest, I love being a lifelong learner, but one reason why I've acquired all these degrees is because I like the coins that come with them. And so these students are going to graduate with debt. They're going to acquire even more debt going into a field that they still can't pay back this debt. Because let's be honest, you want to live. You're going to want to be in a relationship. You're going to want to have children. You're going to want to eat. And it's very hard to do that when you have this debt on top of it. Not only that, looking at the barriers. Let's address the elephant in the room. The lack of diversification in our faculties, in our teacher preparation programs. It's very hard to say, I want to be a teacher when I'm in a teacher preparation program where no one looks like me. We look at situations with the certification program of putting teachers in certain schools for their teaching requirements. Well, we're putting them in schools that people don't look like them. And then when they graduate and they get a degree, they're going into schools that look very vastly different. And then we wonder why they don't feel supported or they don't feel empowered to be the teacher or educators that we want to. Let's think about it. We literally give educators 9 months to figure this thing out. We give them a certificate to put on the wall, and then we throw them in a classroom with 30 kids, and we want them to change water into wine. And then we wonder why we are losing these students, teachers at such an alarming rate. We have to come forth with some sort of way that we're able to empower them, mentor them, and that has to start with teacher preparation programs.
Okay, thank you. Any other reflections on those barriers that teachers face or potential prospective teachers face? And I guess for Ms. Melkai, how does that impact your work? You're really on the forefront of recruiting teachers for your school district. So when teachers or prospective educators face those barriers in becoming educators, what does that look like on your end? If you want to speak to that a little bit.
We've really tried to provide a lot of support for our teachers through those mentor programs. Even trying to relook at Teacher Academy and developing that. Those are some of the things that we really have in place that we're trying to promote the profession, but also having the high standards in the community to promote the profession. What recruitment will look like next year or this coming year, I'm very interested to see what that's going to look like and how we're going to get that done. I am very concerned about getting the candidates, casting the net wide when we may not be able to go to the universities and things of that nature. How to get those students on our campuses to some degree, or to bring them in to show what we have as far as different options for them. So I'm not sure. We're trying to provide the support and for those new teachers to come in, but we'll just have to sort of see how those job fairs and whatnot are going to look like.
Okay, yeah, and we're going to get to that too. Yes, Moss.
I want to build on something that Catherine Melka, in an effort to be solutions oriented as well. Catherine Melka and I had an opportunity to work on building a residency program in Ocean Springs and a couple other school districts. What the research tells us, and what I think the state is learning from the residency model, that while it's an expensive model, it is a very expensive model for preparing teachers. And it's not a silver bullet. It is one of many ways that we can really look at accomplishing what Erica talked about, in many ways of increasing the diversity of our educator workforce, but also addressing barriers with regard to being able to afford school. Many of the educators in the residency program, well, first of all, their education is paid for. And then many of them have jobs in the local school district as they are onboarding to become a teacher. And what always troubled me about our residency work was the inability to expand it. And so as we push for barriers, I don't understand why, if you decide to become a teacher in this state, or in this country, your education is automatically paid for, because it would truly eliminate a barrier in our country. But while we've not been able to move that residency work across the state, I think Catherine can speak to what it's been able to do in terms of their workforce initially. Of course, those teachers are not in their own classrooms yet, but I think that's one solution that we might consider as we really look to it. And, you know, as someone who teaches alternate route courses and someone who studied alternate route education, folks like Linda Darling Hammond got it right, that we really need to ramp up what we do in alternate route programs. We need to ensure that we have a better quality of candidate coming out. And I think residencies give us that opportunity to have this mix between coursework and learning in the actual classroom, whereas alternate route doesn't. Since 2015, we've seen a massive increase in the number of folks who are pursuing alternate route education in this country. That doesn't always translate to quality, though. And so we need to be mindful of solutions that translate into quality for the teachers that we put in front of children.
And funding plays a huge role in that, you know, trying to, especially now, you know, with the budget sort of being up in the air and how that's going to impact. And if there are, you know, most school districts, 80% of their budget is, you know, and their teachers. And so if we're looking at losses in that, what's, you know, that's going to trickle down. So, you know, as we're trying to grow a pipeline, you know, but if we're having to decrease our numbers due to funding, that's paradox. That's an issue.
And this next question, you have kind of like answered in a roundabout way, and I feel like a lot of you were like poking at it. So are there any diversity and or equity gaps in teacher recruitment that you notice? So if we want to expand on that question a little more too, when it comes to recruiting diverse teacher candidates, what does that look like? Are there any barriers to doing so, and or even getting them into classrooms of diverse students? So does anyone want to speak on the equity gaps in teacher recruitment?
I'll speak to it, KP. All right, so in most, just speaking to programs that you have for teachers coming into university, KP, we've talked about this before. Most time with these programs, you're looking for students that have exceptionally high ACT scores, students that have exceptionally high GPA. Those are the students you want to offer your scholarships to and everything to get them into teacher education programs. There's nothing for just the traditional student that's looking to come into teacher education. There's nothing, I've talked with a lot of transfer students. There's nothing for the transfer student that's coming over their third year who is in teacher education, wants to be a teacher. They've decided this is my career. We throw them over and there's nothing for them. And then we wonder why they don't stay in it, because most times they're not acclimated to college. That's another barrier. They're not acclimated to a four-year university. They come over, they're in small community colleges where they feel like their teachers and everything are invested in them. And we throw them in the big bad world of four-year universities, and there's nothing there for them. I talked to a community college student who said, when I got here, I literally had to have a friend to walk me around the campus so I could put a pin in every building on campus so I could know where I was going. And you think about that, and you think, man, really? Because with freshmen, we cultivate that acclimation to college. We don't do that with those students who don't come in on the traditional route with education. So I think that's one of the things that we have to address. What opportunities are being available for those students who may come in non-traditional route? Like I said, I was a traditional student, and the three of you were not. When you are alternate route, what opportunities are available?
And I think support of that process of even entering the universities, that can be a huge barrier. Children just don't know where to start, or if they don't come from a background where their parents maybe went to university and they're navigating it by themselves, it's a very intimidating process. And easily they can slip through the cracks and it just stop the process. It would also be wonderful to see more loan repayments with years of service on a broader scale. I think, we would attract more, because talking about that debt, And especially right now, where many students weren't able to work in the summer to get the financial means to go back to school, I'm concerned about some students not returning because of that. So, I think adding different options, loan repayment and support of the process would be very helpful.
Like that. So anyone else
Also, I
want to?
think it'd be helpful to really talk about the work that you led with educators of color, the Men of Color Conference, and the Women of Color convening, and just the insights that were gleaned from those experiences with hearing directly from diverse educators, because I think it would give us all some insights.
I think one of the things I want to name real quick though, and own for us, is that when we talk about teacher diversity in this country, we probably have one of the most diverse educator workforce in this country in Mississippi. We sit at 29% of the educators in our state being diverse educators. And so I think the issue that we run into though is when we begin to measure diversity, we have to ask ourselves, are we trying to achieve parity? That if 70% of our students are students of color, do we want 70% of our teachers to be teachers of color? Or are we looking at a student-based diversity gap where the percentage, where we measure the diversity of our teaching force against the diversity of our student force? And I think when we talk about this, we need to figure out how we measure it. But we also have one, as someone who's looked at the data across our state, we have one school district where children of color sit and they don't see a single teacher of color at all in their school district. And so I think we really have to get to a place of figuring out what we're measuring when we talk about teacher diversity. What does that look like? What are we hoping to achieve? Because I don't think the solution is as easy as if 70% of our students are students of color, then 70% of our faculty are faculty of color. We are because we have 70% of the students being Black, that 70% of their teachers need to be Black. I don't think our diversity issues are that easy to solve. One of the things that I consistently found with regard to recruiting men, and I'm going to stop after this, is the perceptions associated, one, with being a male elementary school teacher, and that's an issue, is that folks have often viewed male elementary teachers in what has not been a respectable light. And then I think secondly, one of the things we figure out is Black men say, I just don't see myself being able to make enough money to feed my family and take care family and do those things. And so I really think when we talk about diversity broadly, we have to think about it in those two ways. And then finally, what my research has shown me, just in my dissertation study, is that overwhelmingly, teachers of color feel the need to leave the classroom to have some type of leadership opportunity. And so we really have to address what it looks like to provide folks with leadership opportunity, one, while they're in the profession. But before that, we need to talk about what does leadership look like while remaining in the classroom during the pre-service experience. There's a research study that showed us that pre-service teachers actually wanted to learn about leadership opportunities during their training so that when they actually become a teacher. I tell folks all the time, had I been able to make a little bit more money and had I had more leadership opportunities, I might still be teaching 10th grade English at Greenwood High School.
And I'll just kind of chime in based on some of those insights. I think there are a couple of things that we need to be doing differently when it specifically relates to trying to diversify our teacher force. One is specifically around the pre-service experience. So when teachers are having their student teaching experience, they are primarily teaching in the communities that immediately surround the university. And those experiences are not reflective of low-income schools, generally of high minority population schools. And so you kind of, I think about like communities like Oxford, you have this idyllic experience where the school is super diverse and there's a huge tax base and the school building is updated and wonderful. And then when those teachers are ready to go into the profession, they want an experience like the one they had as student teachers. And that's not the case in every school. So how do we uniquely position teacher candidates to be ready to serve in low income communities? How do we uniquely position teacher educator candidates to be ready to serve in high minority school districts that have a turnaround emphasis and a turnaround need? So that's the one thing. I think we give our teacher ed candidates a really disjointed student teaching experience that doesn't reflect what they're likely to experience when they get to another community and teach. It's not the same. And then the other piece around that is a teacher preparation mindset issue. We have a lot of young upper middle class and middle class white women in education, and they may have some mindset issues around what kind of school they want to serve in. And frequently we see lots of people who come out of teacher education only want to teach in certain types of schools. How do we orient teacher education and teacher preparation to ensure that we are cultivating the dispositions and the attitudes to help people understand that all children are our children and they all deserve a great teacher, whether that's in Lafayette or Oxford, or maybe that's in Holly Springs, or maybe that's in Quitman County. Maybe that's in one of those less ideal school districts, but you're needed significantly in those places. And I don't think we really talk about that in teacher education. And I think that that is one of the reasons that we have significant shortages in some communities and significant disproportionalities in other communities where you have teachers who are serving as teachers' assistants, making 50% of teacher pay, are fully certified, waiting for somebody to retire rather than go down the road and teach in a low-income school. That's the reason we have those disparities, because we don't cultivate the mindsets that we need to do at the teacher prep level.
And I think that goes for alternate route additionally, providing that support and that training that's needed.
I want to expand upon what Crystal said, because she said some very powerful things that I have experienced even personally. I've been teaching for 6 years, had a AAA license, have been a teacher of the year in my home district that I started out with, which was a low poverty district. It was a high poverty district, low income district, but had done all these great exceptional things and transferred to a district which was considered one of the best districts in the state, and couldn't get a job as a teacher. I couldn't get a call back for a teacher job. I had to go in as a teacher assistant, actually. And so when you say change the mindset, you have to change the mindset of these affluent districts that regardless of where it is, because think about it, most districts don't want to teach you straight out of college. Let's just be honest. We're looking for classroom management. Somehow we don't have to come down the hall and deal with, and we're not thinking we're going to develop that when you just come out of the teaching farm. So we want you to have a couple years on your belt. Well, you're not going into these affluent districts and you're going to get that. They want you to practice somewhere else and then come into our districts. And so we have to change the mindset of, regardless of where these teachers are coming from, regardless if they're coming from a Chicago, if they're coming from a Detroit, wherever it is, these are marketable candidates that we should put in the teacher force. I do a lot of work with teachers across the country, and I've spoken with several teachers that have become transplants here from Memphis, from Detroit, from Chicago, which says when they're looking at, let's say, as Mr. Moss said, Dr. Moss said, the pay, most affluent districts are giving you a pay bump that you're not going to find everywhere else. They can't even get callbacks in these districts. So I think it's a mindset that is going to have to be addressed on that level also.
You know, Dr. Avent, you bring up a point that I have made with affluent school districts. Two things I want to lean in here. There are children who are in poverty, and then there are children who are underserved in these affluent school districts. And many of them never see a person who reflects their racial identity or their economic identity at all, like at any rate. what we consistently find is bias in interview practices. And that is where the pipeline often gets strained. The particular school district I'm thinking about, when I asked them to look at, they said, well, we can't find any teachers of color or any Black teachers. So I quickly said, well, let's go to your talent management system and let's run a query and identify how many Black candidates you had. I'm building a funnel here, folks. And when we looked at it, they had a significant number of Black candidates who had applied, or teachers of color who had applied. Well, then we moved to the next step in the hiring funnel, which would be to get an interview. What we saw was significant differences in the number of candidates of color who had applied versus ones who had gotten an interview. And so what does that say about your process? You lost people even at the stage of interview. Well, as we moved on in the process, we get to the interview and we find that after the interview, the number of people that are offered a job is smaller. And so the pipe, as you move through the hiring pipe, the funnel, what we continuously find that there are breaks in the school district system that does not allow. So I spoke to the leader. I wouldn't dare, because this leader spoke to me in private setting as we talked about this. But the leader mentioned that his or her leaders that actually do the hiring said that they were afraid to hire these teachers of color because they didn't always speak well, or they did not interview well. And so they weren't willing to hire them. And so what we see is that although, and now we do have an issue with Black teachers or teachers of color choosing to teach, period. But when those who have chosen to teach enter the workforce and apply for jobs in affluent spaces to be able to serve, we see that the funnel gets smaller and smaller. But what we found was that when a candidate was offered a job there of color, they accepted. The issue was being offered one. Further, the issue was being able to be interviewed for a role. And so we also have to deal with, and I'm so thankful for folks like Catherine Melkow who will do a bias check. We have to deal with HR directors, and we have to deal with principals who are not interviewing, who are hiring their cousins, who are hiring their nieces and nephew or cousin Joe's niece because they live in the community. This relational hiring is getting in the way of us diversifying the educator workforce. And I see Catherine unmuted herself, so I'm gonna stop talking because I know she wants to talk about this, but it really gets in the way of us diversifying the educator workforce.
And yeah, I was going to bounce right off of that, relational hiring. I mean, if we're looking at a workforce that is, very specific, and getting that relational hiring practice, that mindset of opening that door, we're working on that. So it's just a difficult mindset too, because Mississippi is mainly made up of small communities. We have one major city and it's a bunch of small communities. And so I think that relational hiring practice is a mindset we have to move away from. But with the COVID and having that impact, it's really, I've seen in our hiring an opening of, we've received a lot of out-of-state teachers. We've hired more out-of-state teachers coming into our state than we have in the past. So that was something that was a positive. Always looking for that silver lining of COVID, but looking at teachers coming in, that's always, I think, just really adds and goes away from the relational hiring.
Because the next question is, how do you think COVID-19's impact on the education landscape will affect teacher recruitment in Mississippi? So if anyone wants to make any kind of pointed reference, I know that came up throughout the conversation, but if anyone wants to make that pointed reference to how they think COVID-19's impact on education will affect recruitment, you can do so.
KB, I think that we're going to change what we're looking for. Administrators are looking for tech savvy teacher education candidates at this hand. They're looking for those that are more flexible. I need you at the drop of the hat be able to turn your entire curriculum around and teach it via a screen. I think that the the ideal of I'm looking for teachers that have classroom management, that's not going to be the focus. I think we're looking for a relationship piece, because you have to be able to form relationships with these kids via this the screen. I think the whole concept of hybrid learning is going to be something that we're going to be hearing for the upcoming years. I think it was Dr. Moss who said we had to dismantle the system of teacher education and certification. I think we're on the cusp of a dismantling of what school looks like, period. We've known about teaching virtually with colleges, even with some high schools and stuff. Well, I think we're looking at a K-12 virtual ideal public education that's coming forth. And so with that, I think that when we say, can you interview well? Well, it becomes different. Can you interview well virtually? Can you connect with parents virtually? A lot of the different things like teacher meetings and stuff. We're not, for years we've said we can't get parents to the school. Well, hey, what do you do when you can't get anybody to the school because of COVID-19? So now it's going to be, well, we're going to use these lovely devices called phones and the internet. And because we realize the internet is not a luxury, the internet is a necessity. And we're going to bring those meetings to them at this point. So I think that is what the whole ideal of what we're looking at to say is a great educator. That whole concept has changed.
And I think the IHLs, you know, them being able to shift, it seems like our younger teachers are shifting so easily because that's been their educational experience. You know, so many classes in universities are hybrid or online, and so that's been very natural for that younger group of teachers.
I'd say that a parent who has a child with special needs said, you know, her in-laws didn't want to attend his graduation because he had gone to school online because he'd had so many educational challenges. And she said, I'm just so frustrated. And I said, well, tell them Harvard was online this year. So everybody went to online school this past year. That was everybody's experience. But I think we're seeing a lot with the COVID pandemic. So we're seeing record numbers of people applying for educator licensure since testing has been suspended temporarily. And I think this is I think that the field can drive the policy. If HR directors and administrators end up with teachers who never took or never passed a licensure exam and will attest to the quality of those teachers and advocate for more like that, I think that we will see the field drive the policy. The field will shape what policy becomes next. So I think that that's going to be a concern. I think we have to look at the attrition of our teachers as they struggle with safety concerns regarding whether they want to go back into school buildings or whether they want to teach in a hybrid or virtual setting or whether they want to leave the profession altogether. I think that the economic instability in the country has encouraged some people to pursue teaching that had not thought to pursue teaching before, because as Catherine pointed out earlier, there is a lot of stability with a teaching job. You've got a contract, you know you're going to be there. Unless you do something egregious, they're going to coach and develop you to make sure that you get better and that you have a stable job. So I think we need to look at attrition of our near retirement educators as people, you know, it was common for people to teach 30, 40, 50 years and they loved it and they kept going. And now, you know, your older teachers may decide, I don't want to risk this, I'm going to go home. Or my daughter or my son needs me to help care for their children because childcare is unstable, so I'm going to go home. So we're going to be looking at attrition of veteran teachers, attrition of young teachers with young families. I mean, y'all just saw the ball bounce past my screen. I've got little kids and got to figure out how to make this work. So I think we have a lot of different shifts happening with recruitment, retention, people's interest in teaching. But I do think something that was said earlier, we have to be very careful to listen to teachers' voices, especially now with the COVID pandemic. Teachers are afraid and they are angry and they don't feel like anybody is listening to them. and they feel like they're being put on the front line of a war against an invisible, deadly enemy. And so I think that we have to be really careful and really thoughtful about how we treat teachers, how we talk to teachers, how we invite them back into schools. I think we need to be really thoughtful and really deliberate as we examine how we retain these teachers long term, if we are going to do so, because I think that these unprecedented times are really creating unprecedented anxiety and frustration and anger.
I think one of the things about COVID, and I just posted about this. For the most part, I hadn't said anything about folks returning back to school, but I said something about it last night because my brother was asking me about it. My mom was asking me about it. Other friends in education. Cortez, what do you think about kids going back to school? Honestly, I think kids need to go back to school at some point, but I don't think kids need to go back at this point where it's not safe. I think what's most troubling for me is that this urgency to get kids back in school, to go back to a factory model of education that never really worked. And then schools to try to take that factory model of education and move it online. I think we really have a unique opportunity to, as I said earlier, dismantle the system that we call education and do something completely different and build a system that truly works for children. One of my friends who's not in education commented and said, we also need to rethink the workday for parents. Who said that we need to have 9 to 5? And if we're going to, I think this country has a unique opportunity to look at the way in which we function as a society. Is I think the first piece of what COVID-19 is giving us the space to do that. I'm not sure we're leveraging that right now. In our personal spaces I've begun to live completely differently. You wouldn't have caught me hiking before COVID-19, but I was hiking yesterday. You wouldn't have caught me kayaking before COVID-19, but it's something that I enjoy doing now. And so I think we have to take an opportunity to drastically rethink the way we function in this world, particularly with regard to schools and parents having to work full days. One of the things I think we also need to note too is that we did not begin recovering from the 2008 economic recession until 2015. Schools were asked to stop hiring teachers during the economic recession, which we saw classroom size exasperated. We saw larger classroom size come into place. 2015 hit and we're able to hire teachers, but then we don't have a workforce that is ready. And so between 2009 and 2014, we saw somewhat of a 32% decline in the number of people who went into teacher education. And so anytime there's a crisis or a financial crisis where we're asking schools to scale back on hiring, we also see a scale back in people going into teacher education. So right now we do see an uptick naturally in our state of folks going to teacher education, but I'm afraid with budget cuts next year, we're gonna see school districts asked to stop hiring teachers. And then we're also going to see a decline in the number of people going into teacher education. And so when we do come out of an economic recession, again, we will not have the educator workforce or the supply of educators to meet the demand of what we need. And so that is something we truly have to be mindful of as we make education policy. I just told some legislators the other day, it's raining. We need to use the rainy day fund to ensure that we're not asking school districts to cut teachers, because that signals something to the market. And that signals something to the market is that there will not be a demand for me once I've gotten this degree or when I've gotten this credential. And so we have to think differently at the policy level. I think finally, what I want to say about COVID-19 implications is we are really moving into a place of our students, I think we'll get to a place of our students learning versus I covered the material. And that's from an instructional core place, right? We know that a complex relationship exists in the presence of a teacher, a student, and content. That's always been a complex relationship. I think what we're going to see in COVID-19 is further interrogation of that complex relationship at the school level, especially if we have virtual learning. We're gonna have to further what does this mean? What does it look like to have teacher, student, and content all virtually? And so I think we're going to get to a better place. Folks are not going to be wasting time to make sure children are learning, as it sometimes happens in the school day. And so I think we have policy implications. I think we have curriculum and instruction implications. And I certainly think we have human capital implications directly as a result of COVID-19. What I'm most concerned about is what our supply and demand will look like because of shifts in the market as a result of COVID-19.
But potentially, you know, if there is online learning and things shift of this nature, that could create opportunities for, in areas of teacher shortages, to remote in. And that also, you know, potentially gives a different licensure or pay scale for a teacher if she's teaching in her class, you know, her classroom, and also remotely to other districts and other areas with, you know, different support measures in there. So, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how it rolls. But, you know, always looking to how to increase that pay scale. That who knows what will come. It'll be interesting.
KP, I also think that COVID-19 is going to do something that educators and administrators and school districts have not been able to do for years. And I think that that is answer the call of things that we know in educators. We knew that classes need to be smaller. There was no way to go about that. It was said. Well, COVID-19 is going to make us do that. It's going to make you decrease these class sizes. So what does that mean? It's going to make us look at the fact, do you have to have 180 days in a seat in order to get a quality education? Who came up with the number of 180 days? It's going to make us really look at what are the things that you need to know to get to this thing. And we've talked about this, power standards and power curriculum and all this kind of stuff. Well, when you have to teach this through the screen, you really start to think about what is the powerful things that you have to go from here. Who says you have to go to school for 8 hours? I need to know who came up with that plan, because we're not doing 8-hour days on the computer right now, and kids are still getting educated, we say. So I really think it's going to shine a flashlight on some things that we have been saying for years. Me personally, I've debated posting this a couple times on Facebook, because, hey, this is, I'm ready for parents. This is your game time. You've always wanted your kids to have their own supplies. You don't want them to share with everybody else. Well, this is your time to shine. I need you to buy every pencil and write your child's name on every single one of them, because guess what? I cannot allow kids to share their yellow crayons. So if your child doesn't have one, their son will not be colored in the day of COVID. So I think it's going to be very interesting. As I said before, the value that's going to be placed upon teachers is going to be so profound after this. The changes that's going to have to come about in education and what we think of brick and mortar schools, I think we're just at the beginning of with this right now.
You know,
and nobody has said, like, not to mention, we didn't test in the spring and the sky did not fall.
It did not. It did not fall. Listen,
I'm not against testing. I just wonder about, do we need to test every year? Maybe we test every other year, save some money, put that money back in the classroom so we can buy some yellow crayons. So they all have a yellow crayon.
We're not going to be able to buy yellow crayons because we got to buy Germ-X. Like right now, I need to use this biology degree and figure out how to come up with this Germ-X, because that's where the money is at right now. I figure out how to put some Germ-X and some wipes in the school district. As you said, Dr. Moss, I won't have to do this education gig anymore if I figure that out. That's where we're at now. Think about the money. We're going to take the money we put into testing. We're going to put it into getting cleaning supplies for schools at this point. It took something like COVID-19 to make us value our custodians in our school. Oh, and let's not talk about the food service force, babe. Them are the real VIPs of COVID-19. The same people we treat bad over these square pizzas in this cafeteria, these are the people that we are applauding at this point. So you're right, Chris. This testing money that we're paying all these companies, we got some other areas we can put them into.
You know, Erica, you said something that just like struck something in me. You said, who came up with these arbitrary numbers about, I think we're finding, and I know KP, we're closing out on time, but we're finding that all of this stuff has been arbitrary. Like, who came up with seat time? Who came up with these? Did someone just decide we need this many? Like, what research was really driving us to say that if a child spends 180 days in school, they're guaranteed to move one grade level? Too many other factors and variables to be able to influence that. And I think, you know, and I want to shut up on this, but, you know, you all have talked about, teachers and you talked about kids, and Erica, Dr. Avan talked a lot about the teacher voice being missing. We're just talking about children. We're not including their voice in this. So I want to name that folks are just talking about children going back to school so that they can go back to their normal 9 to 5. That's why we're talking about children going back to school. It's not as much about learning, but it's really about, because if children go back to school, we can move on with the rest of the world. Like, so a lot of folks are talking about school in that way, but nobody has asked Maxwell, how does he feel about going back to school, which is Crystal's son. No one has asked my nephew, how does he feel about going back to school? Everybody has a survey but the children. And so let's not forget about children in COVID-19 and how we plan for a safe return to school.
You know, we did survey our secondary children, and it was extremely interesting. They're extremely concerned. They're very much more than I had thought. They're very concerned about cleanliness and protecting themselves. And I was very surprised at our survey results. But they do want to get back. They want to get back and they want to have their social time. But they are still more concerned than I realized.
That's a good point. I'm glad that Dr. Moss and Ms. Melkai, I'm glad you brought that up about the student voice, because that is missing a lot of the times when we have these conversations, right? Like what really is best for them, because we don't know. When we were educated, the world was totally different, right? There are different expectations of us, right? And now you have students who are educated who are completing bachelor's degrees in 2 years, right? So it's like their perception of what education looks like is going to be far different than ours. So I'm glad that you did take that survey. That's really interesting. That's all I have for you all today. I really appreciate you coming out. I actually had like 1 or 2 more questions, but y'all basically answered the questions in the conversation and through the discussion. So I'm pretty excited about that. And so what we will do is we'll toss it back over to Cam, and Cam will take us out.